Hello and welcome to the third game of the day video. Today I would like to look at the game Erigaisi Aronian, which was an extremely interesting game. We had one decisive game in the Masters, Caruana beating Juan Forest, but I like this game better. So let's see what happened here. So Erigaisi is extremely well prepared. He goes for the Queen C2 Nimzo in this game. And Aronian plays this rare move C5, so in recent times, short castle or d5 are the main continuations for blacks. For black, c5, dc, castle a3, bishop c5, knight f3, and d5. So this was not played by Aronian before. I believe he played with knight c6 in this position, but yeah, that is kind of the old-fashioned in this opening. Knight c6 fight plays bishop f4 or bishop g5, and black is not really playing this, I believe, because white has some pressure in those positions. So d5, interesting move. It was played by Vincent Keimer, for example, last year. And here, white's main options are c takes d5. So there is some sort of a theoretical position in this. From this position, I mean, I'm saying some sort of, because not very high level and not many games. So there is nothing well established here. And the other one is to play bishop g5. And yeah, here bishop e7 is the main move. I assume Aronian was extremely well prepared for both. And Erigaisi played a very smart move, in my opinion, which is very easy to forget about, I would say, and maybe Aronian did. He played bishop f4. So why this move is smart? I believe it is smart because if black plays the most natural move in the position, okay, most natural maybe d4, right? So okay, if white is not taking, why not to push and attack the knight? But okay, first of all, if you are not prepared, entering such lines against Erigaisi is not a good idea. If you play e3 next, big complications, possession probably objectively good for white, so not a good idea. So that's about d4, and the other most natural move is knight to c6. But here a funny thing that okay, white is going to play e3. And it's not an Nimzo Indian defense anymore, but it's an opening which Aronian played, but I believe not this variation, and probably he was absolutely not prepared for this day. So this is actually the Lasker variation. The Queen's Gambit declines. So let me show you how you normally get this position with a completely different move order. So we got it from we got this position from the knight c3 Nimzo, but normally it happens like knight f3, d5, knight c3, bishop e7. White plays bishop f4, castle, e3, c5. So you can see completely different moves. D c5, I mean, d takes c5, now bishop c5. So the bishop was not attacked this time, but it simply developed to e7 and then to c5. Queen c2, knight c6, a3, and queen a5, for example, is the main line. It was played by Caruana Cards and World Championship match, and many games, heavy theory, and very direct and concrete lines. So it's kind of a weird transposition. I believe Aronian was not ready, so he was kind of caught in the opening a little bit. Of course, these are just my speculations by seeing the time they spent. If there will be interviews after the game, then it will be interesting to hear what will they say. So Aronian took dc4, which is very safe move and a smart move in my opinion. I like this move. It's not the best move in the position, but it will go it will lead to a symmetrical structure where nothing that bad can happen for black. He's pretty solid, and white has to play well to achieve an advantage. So white plays e3, a6, bishop takes on c4. I believe this is all correct. b5, and this is the first critical moment for Erigaisi. Aronian played very naturally. Maybe he forgot what to do here with white, but after his move bishop e2, black is already equal. So, as I said, the pawn structure is completely symmetrical. So if black is ready to comfortably finish development, the position is just equal, as we will see in the game, or in some situations, if white is not precise, black can even take over. So bishop e2 is simply too modest, I would say. It cannot really lead to anything. Bishop d3 was the good move here for white, which could have posed some problems. So, for example, bishop b7, and here there are different options. I looked at knight g5. It doesn't really lead anywhere. So, for example, some lines like this. But after queen b6, again, it really feels like that black is just in time to finish development. There is another interesting try which was played in a couple of games, bishop g5. So the idea is to hit this pawn on h7 because of this pin. So black pretty much has to play h6 in this position. And after bishop f6, here comes the point. So if queen f6 would work, then okay, black is already like maybe slightly better with the bishops. Sorry, but after knight e4, the game is over. So it's a double attack on the bishop. And it also attacks the queen. So bishop takes e4 is a must, but now it's a double attack on the bishop and the rook. And black is losing material here. But instead of queen f6, gf is fine. And after short castle, for example, knight d7. So black's king side is a little bit damaged, but actually this structure is not that big of a deal. Sometimes even king h8, rook g8 can be played. So there is really not much wrong here for black. It's just equal. So in my opinion, the most challenging move for black is if white castles short here. So now knight bd7, rook fd1, and this is the typical advantage which white has in symmetrical positions. Then he has he started the game, and he can always be like one step ahead. Like, so now he's the first one to bring the rooks to the open file. He can be the first one to push e4 probably. He can be the first one to attack something on the king side. So I'm just playing the moves how the game went, because these are very natural, like rook c8. I mean, how the game went when Erigaisi played with bishop e2. So rook c8, knight goes to e5. So it's immediate tactical idea. Like, for example, if bishop just goes away, then bishop h7, knight h7, rook d7. This is something black has to solve. h6, knight takes d7. Again, the knight has to take. Queen d7 is bishop h7 check. So knight d7. And again, a typical idea which is good to be familiar with, that so this bishop is really nice, and normally white wants to trade it, and therefore open the square for the knight or the queen. But before doing so, and preparing for eventual endgames and maybe the protection of the f7 pawn, it's useful to give this check. Force the king into the corner. So for the endgames, it will mean one extra move to spend for black, and also for the middle game, the f7 pawn can be an issue sometimes. So now bishop e4, bishop takes, queen e4, queen e7, queen b7, and we are definitely under pressure here with black a little bit. And strangely enough, this all happened in a game, in an actual game up to this moment. and not between grandmasters between 22 or 2300, I believe, were both players. So they played really great here. So that would have been better, but let's return to the game. So bishop e2. So what is the idea of this move? I mean, it is just one small idea. I would say that it also looks tempting because white has this idea of taking on b5 and then taking the bishop on c5. So for example, if bishop b7, it's a typical trick in such position that there is knight b5, and if black recaptures, white is just winning a pawn. And it's not an equal exchange for black if he tries to be smart with bishop e3, because after bishop e3, ab short castle, not only white has the pair of bishops, but this pawn on b5 is extremely weak. This is a very, very tough position for black. But Aronian basically very cleverly changed the move order. So first he develops the knight, protects the bishop, and then plays bishop e7, and basically it means he completely solved his opening problems by this moment. So bishop b7, and we can say the position is just equal. White cannot really put any pressure. This bishop is gonna be better than this one, and all pieces very naturally can come into the game from black, no problems whatsoever. So rook d1, rook c8, rook d2, queen b6, and from this moment on, Erigaisi spent more and more time for each move, and Aronian just played very quickly and very confidently here. Rook d1, rook d8, queen b1, very natural moves, 8-6, bishop g3, bishop e7, knight to e5, knight to c5. Of course, knight e5 is fine, but here Aronian was getting already ambitious. Bishop to f3, rook takes d2, rook d2, and I would say a typical Aronian move came in this position because he said himself he likes cheapos very much, and I mean this 94 looks probably too nice for him to not to play. Objectively, a5 is also very interesting to try to push a little bit on the queen side. So position is probably still equal, but definitely black has the chances to make things happen here. So he played 94. So what is the idea of the move? I mean, okay, so 94 was played. Bishop takes, knight takes. That at the end of the line, this knight is not hanging because it's a back rank checkmate. So that's why this 94 looks really nice. And once again, the position is equal. So it was just a fine move by Aronian. And here we have the next critical position. So white can play both rook c2 and rook d1, and okay, the position is again like very solid for white, but I believe he made it difficult for himself at this moment, even though the correct move, which I believe is rook c2, was also not straightforward equality, I would say. So the point is that again now trade will come, because if black is playing rook d8, then there is knight c6, which is a huge problem here. After such moves, it's white winning the game. So black has to play queen b7, but it's still a little bit better. I mean, this bishop is really out of the game. So now things are happening on the queen side in the c file, and this bishop is not doing much. So queen c1 is correct here, forcing issues. Queen c2, queen d5. So black's pieces are simply better coordinated here. Also, there is knight takes g3 with attacking this knight. I mean, sorry, taking that knight basically. So white has to play knight c6. These are basically only moves for white here. Knight c6, bishop c5, and knight b4. And I'm not sure if Erigaisi calculated this line or not, but it's something very tough to go, from afar, in my opinion. So, because basically knight b4, a b4, this is something which black would normally like to see, because now the symmetry is broken. So white has doubled pawns on the b file. It's a knight and queen against the queen and bishop, which is normally favorable for the queen and knight. They can play really well together. For example, attacking on light squares. Just imagine that, and then the bishop is completely useless. So, but it has to be said that according to computer, it's nothing. So white will play f3 in the next move, and of course, this position is holdable without many problems. But I would say for a human player, at least for me, I would not gladly go into such position when it looks like that I have other options. So I can understand what white did here. So he played rook d1, but from this moment on, Aronian plays at the absolute possible best level, I would say, for like, I don't know, 20 moves. So he takes g3, h takes g3, and queen c7. So he's gaining control over the c file, where there is an entry square on c2, very important, also attacking the knight now. So knight d3, threat is to play rook c1 and completely equalize, but black is just coming in with queen to c2. So now rook c1 had to be played. If queen takes on c2, rook c2, then black entered into white's possession, and after, let's say, rook b1, you can play something like rook d2, knight e1, bishop f6, and like the pawns here. If the b pawn moves, then a3, very tough. It's already clear advantage. So rook c1 was correct from white. Queen takes b1, rook takes b1, and most of the players would be tempted to immediately play rook c2, which by far looks like the most natural move. But Aronian played a fantastic move, rook d8, so he foresee everything correctly here, because after rook c2, actually he cannot do any damage to white, and white will be able to kick this rook out from the second rank. So how it is happening? So white plays king f1, now rook d2, so hitting the knight and threatening with bishop f6, sorry, to hit the b2 pawn. Only move for white, knight e5, and after bishop f6, everything looks great. Knight has to move and b2 is falling, or if f4, then the rook endgame will be just pretty much hopeless. But white has this very important move, king e1, and after rook c2, white can return with the knight to d3, protect on b2, and the knight is amazing here, protecting both pawns, and the king will kick the rook out and secure the draw for white. So this extremely tempting move was actually a serious mistake, allowing white to stabilize, but rook d8. So if now the knight would move, then rook d2 is coming. So white played rook d1, and again, the most challenging way, he is playing e5. So the idea is to play e4 and of course win this knight, because it's now pinned to the rook. So Erigaisi plays f3, f5, and king f1 he plays. So for example, if e4 would have happened here, then I believe after f5 it's already losing for white. Since if ef5 there is e4, it's a big problem. And if f3, then we will just transpose to the line which I am showing you. So game went f5, king f1 from white. So in case of e4, black can just take, and rook d4. So attacking on e4 now. Only way to protect, knight f2. Now bishop c5. Extremely unpleasant pin. King f1, only move. Rook takes d1, knight d1, and the crucial move or idea for such endgames, bishop d4. So this is the thing which the knight really doesn't like, that all of its squares are controlled by the bishop. So when two squares are between the bishop and the knight, this is very, very unpleasant. And yeah, basically this is already lost by force. So white plays, let's say, king e2, king f7, b3, so the knight can move finally. King g6, but once the knight moves, we simplify into a king and pawn endgame, which is easily winning. So king e3, king g5. Thanks to the double pawns, basically, eventually it will be a zugzwang. So let's say g6, and white can make one move here, but we will make one more with the g pawn, and just next move going to take g3 and win. So white correctly played king f1. Again, best move e4. It's basically a pawn sacrifice, but very well calculated, and it's already preparing for a bishop versus knight endgame where the king can just run towards the queen side. So pretty forced sequence is coming here: fe, fe, knight f2. So trade, king f7, knight f2, bishop f6. So very nice. So basically, black is trading pawns and sort of making the board even more wide, which is excellent for the bishop. So the bishop can, control everything from one square, and for the knight from running here and there, it's obviously more difficult. King e6, knight e4, and very nice position because currently white is up a pawn. Black has only three pawns, so the material is very limited. But it's it's obvious that only black can win, and it's not so easy to make a draw with the white pieces here. So king d5, knight d2, king c5, king is coming. That was an absolute must, and white is just in time. So king b4, king d3, king takes a4. So here, of course, if something like this happens, that white is trying to push his own pawn, it's absolutely hopeless. Bishop is blocking, and this pawn is running. So king d3, king a4, white's chances to block this king and not to allow, for the pawn to go like that. So now bishop g5, forcing the knight to f1, king a5, e4, king b6, knight h2. Best play from both sides. Now sometimes the knight can come to g4. Aronian plays h5, knight f3, bishop e7, e5, king c6, knight d4, check, king d7. So the king came back to stop this pawn, and sometimes the a pawn can run. So e6 and king c7. So I don't know for how many moves now, but like 25 at least. Aronian is playing perfectly, but Erigaisi is also defending the best possible way. So it's extremely high quality. But I would say, finding these moves which are putting pressure were more difficult for Aronian than defend with Erigaisi. But of course, you still have to defend perfectly. So here king c7. Problem with the more natural looking king d6 is that after knight f5, take, and white is just taking all the pawns and the game is a draw. So king c7, king d5, a5. And this is a draw objectively, but a very difficult endgame, and both players, in a couple of moves are going to make mistakes, back and forth. So very limited material, but still very difficult, of course. So Erigaisi here played knight b5, which is still good for a draw, but can make things a little bit more tricky. So there was one straightforward way to make the draw, but that's required quite precise calculation. So it's g4. It's sometimes like good to have this move, because then black will have doubled pawns, and the knight can attack the pawn on g4, and it will help with the trade. So this move is not necessary to make the draw, but it can help. So h takes g4, knight c6. So now obviously it's a double attack on the a pawn and the bishop. So what is more important? I mean, obviously the a pawn. So if the a pawn is gone, then the game cannot be won. So let's say, for example, if bishop b4, then the way to make the draw is knight e5. So here you see the point of starting with g4, that the knight has ideas sometimes to take this pawn. So for example, if black playing a4, white is winning a tempo with king to c4 and bishop d6, knight g4. It's just a draw, so there is not really not enough material left. Knight is probably coming to f5 and more trades will come. So on knight e5, g3, king c4, king d6, and now the second point of g4, and now it's probably more relevant even, and you will understand why it is important, that without g4 in this position there is no such move like e7. So e7 is crucial for white to have a draw king and pawn endgame. So e7 must be taken, right? Because otherwise it's a queen. And then knight c6 check, king e6, knight b4, a b4, king b4. And okay, I will not put the moves in without g4, but you can just imagine that if black's pawn is back on h5 here and white has a pawn on g3, black is just playing king f5, king g4, king takes g3, king takes g2, and wins. But here, because of his own pawn, he cannot enter. So it's extremely hard to foresee. So, but yeah, this was one way to make the draw. So black plays king e5, king c3, king e4, king d2, and this is one of the end games. I mean, king can just run to the corner and stay there. Like cannot get the king out. It will be a stalemate at some moment. So this is already a pretty fantastic idea, I would say, to draw the game like this. And this is only one of the tries for black, which had to be calculated. The other one is if a4. So black is sacrificing the bishop, but the pawn is running and the pawn is unstoppable. So the king is not in time, obviously, like very far, and the knight should give a check at this moment, but the king is preventing that idea to catch the pawn. So the knight has to go to f5, a2. So if white is playing e7 here, then king d7 is stopping the pawn and the game is over. So the knight is no way, where you are giving a check now, you are not catching that pawn. So, but there is this beautiful move, knight g7, a1 queen, and e7. And again, kind of a study-like draw that, even though this is just absolute perfect construction for white, because the knight is supporting the promotion of the pawn, so the king is never in time, and the knight is taken, there is queen. So wherever black is giving checks, I mean, nothing is happening. Basically, the king can go anywhere. Only thing is not to blunder somehow with the pawn on e7, but it's not even easy to blunder. So yeah, so not very easy, but this was a straightforward way to make a draw. Knight b5, not the cleanest, but also fine. So black played king d8, but here white should have gone back to d4 simply, and that's a draw. I'm saying simply. I mean, it's very difficult. So by no means it is easy to allow this pawn to run to a3, for example. So let's say a4, king to c4, bishop f6, knight e2. So now the idea is to come to f4 and then to take the pawns. So bishop e5, king b4, king e7, king a4, and yeah, this position is just a draw. Although white is again in a danger of facing this king f5, king g4, and then take on g3. But again, this move is pretty nice. So h takes on g4, king b3, king b5, and white king is just in time to stop the black king to enter, and then put it in f1, and that is just a draw. So this was probably, humanly speaking, the so rather in this position, so instead knight f4 is an idea, but king b4 of course is even bigger idea. So humanly speaking, this was the moment to make the safest draw. He goes knight c3, and Aronian continues to play perfectly. So bishop b4, knight a4, king e7, and here white is already in a lot of trouble. It's already a lost position here for white. Of course, not so easy, but it's lost. So what are the problems here for white? King cannot really move. King goes this I mean, this pawn cannot be given up. If king e5, then bishop d6, and this pawn is falling. So also not very advisable. So Erigaisi went knight b6, and Aronian went king f6 here, which actually spoils. It spoils the win. So it's not winning after king f6, but the move is very natural. There was already a forced win available, but again, the position is extremely complex, and even by using engine, it takes a lot of time to figure out. And I hope I will not say any wrong variation here. I mean, because engines can also be wrong in such situation, and they can say -9, -10, but sometimes you just don't see the idea that why it is like that. So bishop e1 was the winning move here. So white is playing g4. If not g4, but something like knight c8, king d8, knight d6, then a4, king c4, and black is playing g6. So we don't have to rush by taking that pawn. More important is to collect e6, and later we will win on the king side. So bishop e1, g4, h takes on g4, knight a4, and it's very easy to imagine that this position is simply a fortress. Like how black can go forward. I mean, okay, we have one passed pawn, but other pawns are just doubled pawns on the g file. This king is protecting this dangerous pawn on e6, but by some smart play, black can actually win here. So king d8. Obviously, the king will be needed to either enter on the king side, take this pawn, or kick this knight. So for some reason, to do something, it will be needed. So here knight b6, probably the best defense. If king e5, then bishop h4. So controlling the square, and king can go. King f5, bishop f6, king g4, and g6. Again, very, very nice move. So basically now the bishop and the pawn make sure that the king has no entry squares here for quite a while. And then king f4, king c7, king e4, and king d6. So the knight is basically almost stalemated there, losing the pawn, and then we will go in one of the sides of the board. It depends where the king will try to defend. So this is losing. There is another move which I believe is kind of the critical try, that how we are going to win if white is just passing basically. So knight b6, bishop b4, knight a4, bishop f8, knight b6. So again, white is claiming that this is a fortress, not much to do. King c7, knight a4, bishop e7. So obviously now there is no knight b6. king cannot move. King has to control the c6 square for the king not to go. So knight has to find another square, but it's pretty easy. So knight b2 here. And a very careful and precise move is needed here from black, because we can already mess up the game at this moment. So king b7 is a must. King has to go here, and it's a really nice square for the king because it can basically go forward in all three directions from this square. Why the most natural move king b6 is not good? I mean, simply because white has this amazing idea of playing knight c4, king b5, and sacrificing the knight. And even though it looks hopeless, the pawn endgame is possible to save. Actually, it's possible to save. So king takes on a5, king c6, king b4, king d7, huge tempo on the bishop, bishop f6, e7, must take, king e7, king c3. And indeed, if we would go for this pawn, like king to f7, king to d3, king g7, king e3, king g5, g3, just winning for black. But instead of going for that meaningless pawn, in this position, white plays king e6. So this pawn is what matters. King d3, king f5, g3, and white is taking that pawn and making the draw here. He is just in time to make the draw. So once we see this line, we can get an idea that what will be the key here, even though it's, again, not easy. So we play king b7. Black plays knight a4. So king a6, unfortunately, also not good because king c6, and now our king is basically really in a cage. It's a draw. But we play bishop f8 now. White again has to pass, knight b2, and now we play king b6. So the point is that we want king b5 and then push the pawn, easy win. If white is not doing anything, so knight c4. I mean, white's best try again is to go for this. But now you see this idea of smart maneuver from black, that now king b4, king d7 is not a tempo on the bishop, which was on e7, but it's on f8 now, and that's all what black needed here to win. One extra move. I mean, extremely hard to foresee. So king c3, e7 must, takes, king d2, king f7 is hopeless, king e6, king to e3, king f5, g3, king g4, and now black king can protect the pawn, king h3. White can also protect, but again, bad luck for white that we have an extra g pawn, and after g6 we win. So basically this way, this bishop e1 move here, back then 20 moves ago, was winning. So instead Aronian went king f6, and yeah, this is now a draw, but again difficult, and white needs different type of defense against king f5 and different type against king g5, because that's black's idea to take these pawns, or if the knight is going somewhere, of course, then they push the pawn. And that's why Erigaisi's next move g4. I mean, g4 is an idea, as we saw in many lines. So it's one of the key ideas for white, but not against every move. That was his bad luck here. And so the correct move is to start with knight d7 check. So basically to ask black, so you want from here to g4 or from f5 to g4, basically. Or if you go back, then we repeat, which is, of course, not the correct way. So here, king g5 or king f5. Let's start with king f5. And here, there is one way to make the draw, and that's why this g4 from Erigaisi was a great idea. So now g4, brilliant move, makes the draw. So let's see why it is like this. So if white plays knight to e5, then a4, knight to c6, So the bishop is sinking. Bishop f8, e7, bishop takes, knight takes with a check. So it's very important that it's a check, because if it's not a check, the pawn could just run. But in this way, even the king and the knight can catch. So king g4, king c4, a3. Okay, a3 is not needed, but it's better for illustrating the point. King b3, and this position is winning for black here. The knight cannot alone stop the black pawns. So king takes g3 would be a huge error, allowing this knight f5 check and taking the pawn, which is a draw. But black can play g5, and the knight is helpless here against this idea. So for example, knight d5, king g3, knight e3. If knight f6, it's also losing h4, knight e4. Of course, we are not taking the pawn because knight g5 is a draw, but we play king f4, knight f6, g4, and h3. I looked at this line all the way, but white is just not in time to make the draw, and black is winning. So this was knight f6. Instead, knight e3 is also possible, but then just h4 is easier. Next move, king f2 and king g2. Each pawn will queen in this way. So that's why it is losing. Just by one move probably, but this position is important to understand that this is losing here. g5 is super important, but this is winning the game. And if we see this line, then after g4 we will understand why it's a draw. So now h takes on g4. Knight goes to e5. Black goes a4. Knight c6. So we are going down the same line, e7. Bishop takes, knight takes. King f4. Black can also try king f6. But now knight is going to stop the pawn. Knight c6, a3, knight b4, king f5, and again very nice move g3, stopping the entry squares from the king, and this is a draw. So king f4, king c4, and now thanks to the fact that we have doubled pawns here on the g file, white is able to make the draw with the knight. So very small differences, but these are making the result completely different. So king g3 now. If g5 now, it's not so good, because simply knight d5, king g3, and knight e3. So white is in time to protect the pawn. Black can play king f2, but then it's just a draw. So king g3, knight f5 takes, and king f3, knight h5, for example. Black cannot do anything against this knight. Eventually g3, and the draw is coming. So this was one way to make the draw. Yeah, sorry. So that's the g4 line. Basically, that was the main line, that this position, compared to the other one where black did not have double pawns, it's now drawable. Sorry, that is just, yes. So if knight d7 check, so the other move is king g5, and in this case we don't need g4, because here it's not coming with the tempo anyway, so the a pawn can run. So here black has to play knight c5. I can show you the line. So it's like if g4, then just takes, knight e5, a4, knight c6, bishop f8, e7, takes, a3, and white is not catching that pawn. Instead, knight c5, king g6. The point is that now e7 is the threat, and of course if king f6 it is just a repetition. So king g6 and knight d3. So bishop f8, king c6. This move is forcing the draw here. a4, king d7, a3, knight c1, king e7, king g4, king f7, king takes g3, and again this king g7 would be a losing move, but there is this fantastic king g6, and after h4, king g5, king g2, king h4 makes a draw, because even if the king runs towards the knight is, I mean, this is a theoretical position that the knight is holding against the a3 pawn. So rather to correct myself, so the thing is that after king f5, it is extremely needed to play g4 for preparing for that knight against the pawn possessions. But against king g5 in a pawn endgame, of course, we don't want to start with a hopeless position. So like here, so this was the line, right? So here, white plays king f5, black plays king f5. Sorry. So just imagine that we would have sacrificed the pawn in this line, and then simply the king is running to take that pawn and win the game. So that's the difference here. That in one position we are preparing against a knight versus pawns fight, and the other one will be a pawn endgame where we don't have to sacrifice the pawn. So that's why it's better to start with knight to d7. Okay, very, very difficult, and it takes time with engine to figure out these things, and even then it's a little bit confusing. So over the board it's even more difficult. But having said all of that, so knight d7 makes the draw, but g4 is losing. Aronian took knight d7, and he played king e7 here, and that was not the way to go. I mean, he can just play king g5 here. So if basically the line what I showed to you. So knight c5. I mean, if knight b6, then there is king f5. Knight c8, king f6, basically playing for Zugzwang. And at the very least, if you remember for those lines what I showed, like this knight b6, king e7, when I showed that what if black is doing nothing with the knight, how we win that position. So now we will win exactly with that technique. So knight c5, threatening e7, king g6, knight d3, bishop f8, king c6, a4. So this is the line which I was actually talking about, knight c1, king f5, e7, take, king f4, and this pawn endgame is winning now. So king f7, king g3, king takes on g7, king g2, and this pawn is winning. And also there is one more funny line, that if king e6, we have to be careful, because if king g3, then king f5 makes the draw. But first we push the pawn to g3, and then we are going to take on g2 and then promote. So this is losing. So this is the difference, but basically we just transpose to the previous lines what I showed, that that the king is not trying to enter from f5 but from g5, and in this way we don't sacrifice the pawn to make a draw in the pawn endgame, but we keep it on g3, and that helps to make the draw. So I'm not sure what Aronian missed at this moment, actually, because, or maybe it just looked, maybe he missed king g6. Actually, this is a kind of, it looks more natural to play king f6 and stop the pawn right away, but this move is just very strong and pretty much a Zugzwang here for white. So he has to let the bishop back, and then it's winning just by one tempo. So instead he went king e7, and Arjun played knight b6 back. Of course, if Aronian plays king f6, we enter the same losing position for white. But yeah, Aronian didn't see it originally. He didn't go for it. So for a couple of moves, he had the possibility to go back and set up the winning position again. To be honest, objectively speaking, 95 is even a better defense for Arjun, but this is still losing, even though black has only one move to win, which is bishop d2. Basically, it's preparation for knight g4, because cutting the square from the knight to stop this pawn on the a file. So let's say knight takes g4, a4, and yeah, knight is not in time, so king has to block the pawn, but then this is falling. So probably it's better to give a check on c6, king e8, king c4, a4. Yeah, this is also a very nice position actually. It's pretty much a very, very weird type of Zugzwang here, that the king basically cannot get closer to the pawn because of the bishop, and the knight cannot really move because then this pawn is getting into trouble. So unfortunately for white, the king eventually has to move. Then a3, important. King c2, bishop f4, king b3. Bishop is coming back nicely. So this is the very huge advantage of having a bishop in such position. It's protecting the pawn and also stopping white to play e7. King a2, and even though it looks like that the pawn and the knight is blocking quite nicely the black king, black is just playing king g6 and coming around like this, slowly but surely winning the game. So even after 95, I mean, it was maybe a harder way to find a win with black, but that was also losing. So Arjun went back to knight b6, Aronian goes bishop e1, king e5, bishop g3, king d5, still a winning position because you can all the time transpose back to this king f6 line. So you just put the bishop back to b4 and play king f6 and it's winning. So king e5, and now the move which gave away the win is king d8. So you can still do this check on g3, for example, then e1, bishop bishop b4, and win that endgame. But after king d8, knight d5, it's just a draw, because now finally the knight is and the pawn is doing a perfect job where the king is completely stuck with defending against this e pawn. So Aronian played a4, and they agreed to a draw because, for example, a4, king d4, a3, king c3, check here, and both kings have to take care of the passed pawns, and they will just go back and forth. So yeah, this endgame was extremely complicated, I believe, with many nice ideas, sometimes with fortress ideas, sometimes with sacrificing a piece or going for pawn endgame. Really, really very complex. And before that, again, just Aronian, I believe, played fantastic game, like putting pressure with black on Erigaisi, like really fantastic performance. And it's a little bit unfortunate that he missed the win at the end, but still great game by both and a great fight.